Ever get the feeling something's gone quiet? Like a little too quiet.
You mean like when you lose your keys and you know they were just here a minute ago?
Exactly. Except this time, it's not our keys. It's a microscopic troublemaker called Mycoplasma pneumonia. And after laying low for a while, it's back on our radar.
It's like it was playing hide and seek, and now it suddenly decided to jump out and say, boo!
You sent us some research on this, and honestly, it's weirder than we expected. So let's dive in. First off, we're dealing with bacteria here, but this Mycoplasma pneumonia, it's not your average bug, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's got this, well, atypical vibe, even for a bacterium. Like it's ridiculously small, even compared to other bacteria.
So we're talking seriously small, even for the microscopic world.
Seriously small. And get this, it doesn't even have a cell wall. Imagine a fortress with no walls.
Okay, hold on. That throws a wrench in things. Most antibiotics, they target that cell wall, right?
Exactly. That's their whole MO. But this sneaky little bug, it's like, nope, not today.
Yeah.
Those antibiotics just can't latch onto anything.
So we're talking tricky to treat on top of being super tiny.
You got it. And to add to the fun, this whole no cell wall thing, it's actually why we call the kind of pneumonia it causes atypical pneumonia.
So not your grandma's pneumonia then. What makes it atypical?
Good question. Symptoms are often milder compared to regular pneumonia, but here's the thing. It can still pack a punch, especially for folks with other health concerns.
So we need to take it seriously. And you said it tends to show up in waves.
Right? Like clockwork. Pre-pandemic, we'd see these Mycoplasma pneumonia infections surging every few years. They call them epidemics.
Yeah.
Data shows they usually hit every 1 to 3 years, especially over in Europe and Israel.
And the last big wave, if I'm remembering right, was just before 2020, right?
Right on the money, right before everything changed.
And that's where this whole story gets really interesting. Because 2020, we all remember what happened then. Lockdown hits, and suddenly every germ out there is like, wait, what's going on?
Right. Respiratory infections just plummet.
Exactly. Like across the board, our little Mycoplasma pneumonia included, of course.
Yeah. The numbers dropped significantly.
Which, okay, makes sense, right? We were all basically hermits for a while there. But here's the thing. Remember how other infections started creeping back up as things opened back up?
Oh, yeah. They bounced back pretty quickly.
But Mycoplasma pneumonia, not so much. It's like it took the whole social distancing memo and decided to write a sequel.
It's bizarre, right? Like it went into hiding, came back out for a second, and then just disappeared again.
So in 2020, big drop. Yeah, we get it. Pandemic. But then 2021 rolls around, other infections are making their comeback tours, and Mycoplasma pneumonia cases, they actually go down even more.
And this wasn't just a little blip. It was significant enough that researchers were like, okay, what are we missing here?
It's like it understood the assignment a little too well.
And it really set it apart from other infections. Like, we were seeing these other viruses come back, no problem, but Mycoplasma pneumonia, it was nowhere to be found.
So what did they do? They called in the big guns, right? Enter the ESGMAC MAPI-S study. Tell me I'm not mixing up my acronyms here.
You got it. April 2022, this massive global effort kicks off to get a handle on this whole Mycoplasma pneumonia situation.
Like a global task force dedicated to this one tiny bacterium.
Basically, they were tasked with tracking cases worldwide, looking for any signs of, a resurgence.
And initially, what were they seeing? More of the same? Or was there a clue there to this vanishing act?
At first, it was pretty much radio silence. For most of 2022, those ESGNet reports, same story. Low levels of Mycoplasma pneumonia. But then, as 2022 wrapped up...
Wait, hold on. Before you get to that, I gotta ask, if other infections were bouncing back, why do you think Mycoplasma pneumonia stayed off the grid for so long?
Well, one theory was that maybe it was facing some competition. Like maybe another virus was hogging all the resources, and Mycoplasma pneumonia was just biding its time.
Oh, so like a microbial turf war.
Exactly. But there's a snag with that idea. Remember how we were saying those other infections came back pretty quickly?
Yeah, they weren't wasting any time.
Right. So if another virus was calling the shots and keeping Mycoplasma pneumonia down, we'd expect to see it reappear around the same time as those other guys, right? Or even later. Not like lagging behind as much as it did.
Okay, so scratch the viral rivalry theory. What about immunity? Could it be that last big wave right before COVID that gave everyone some kind of like temporary shield, and it just took a while for that to wear off?
That was another thought. Absolutely. Scientists were considering that. But again, it's a bit of a head scratcher when you look at the details. See, some countries had their Mycoplasma pneumonia outbreaks even earlier than 2019, and guess what? They still haven't seen a huge comeback.
It's like they were first in line for the comeback tour, but they're still waiting for the band to show up.
Exactly. And that's the thing. If it was all about immunity wearing off, we'd think those countries would be leading the charge, right?
So we've got no viral rivalry, we've got no fading immunity. What does that leave us with? Why is this little bug such a master of hide and seek? It's like it read the pandemic playbook and decided to write its own chapter.
It really does make you wonder, doesn't it? And this is where we have to think about Mycoplasma pneumonia a little differently. Remember how we talked about it being weird, even for bacteria?
Yeah.
That whole super slow growth rate, the crazy long incubation period? That might be the key here.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection here. It's like it's moving in slow motion compared to the rest of the germ world.
Exactly. Imagine your Mycoplasma pneumonia for a second. You're trying to make this big comeback, but your growth rate, it's like trying to run a marathon in lead boots.
Hmm.
And on top of that, you've got this incubation period that just won't quit, 1 to 3 weeks. So even if you manage to spread, it takes time, for your effects to be felt. It's like it's playing the long game, right?
So instead of this sudden spike, it's more like a slow burn?
You could say that, yeah. It's like it's rebuilding its forces, but very, very quietly.
Okay, that's both fascinating and a little creepy. But let's bring this back down to earth for a second. What does this resurgence actually mean for us out here in the real world? Like, are we talking a mycoplasma, pneumonia, tsunami, or more of a ripple in the pond?
Honestly, it's too early to say for sure. We're still in the early chapters of this whole thing. The good news is we've got the ESGMAX study keeping an eye on things, tracking its every move.
It's like having a global alert system for this one tiny bacterium.
Exactly. They're constantly monitoring, analyzing data, ready to sound the alarm if things start to go sideways.
Let's say, hypothetically, this comeback picks up steam. Could we be looking at, like, more serious cases? Because our immune systems, they haven't had to deal with mycoplasma pneumonia as much lately. It's like they haven't practiced this drill in a while.
That's a fair point. And it's something scientists are keeping a close watch on. There's always that chance that when exposure drops, immunity drops too, and that can mean people get hit harder.
So it's a waiting game, but not one we can ignore. It really makes you think if something as well studied as this can still throw us curveballs, what else is out there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The microbial world is vast and always changing. There's always something new to learn.
Well said. Okay, before we send everyone off into a spiral of microscopic intrigue, let's recap what we've got here. We started with this tiny bacterium, Mycoplasma pneumonia, with its disappearing act that rivals Houdini himself. It basically ghosted us during the pandemic, laid low way longer than any other respiratory infection we know of.
We threw out some theories. Maybe another virus was muscling in, maybe it was an immunity timeout, but the evidence just wasn't adding up.
It was a real head-scratcher. And in the end, we're left with these quirks of Mycoplasma pneumonia itself, that snail's pace growth rate, that marathon incubation period as possible explanations.
And while we don't know if this comeback is going to be huge or a flash in the pan, the ESGMAC MAPES folks are on the case, gathering clues 24/7.
Which is good to know, right? They're like the detectives of the microbial world. But here's a final thought for you. If something this tiny can play hide and seek this well, what other microbial surprises might be lurking out there, just waiting for their moment?
Now that's something to think about.
A little cliffhanger to end on. But hey, that's the microbial world for you, always keeping us on our toes. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep an eye out for those ESG Mac updates, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic you send our way.